What's good, gang? Welcome back to my Systems, Philosophy, and Mental Models course. I am Nate Rose with AI for Indies, and today's lesson is on learning to talk to AI. And yes, that's actually a skill that's worth developing. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, most people use AI the same way that they use Google. They type something in and they get something back and then they move on. That pattern made sense for search engines. They were built for retrieval. One question, one answer, transaction complete. But when you bring that same habit to a large language model, you're leaving most of the capability on the table. These tools were not built for retrieval. They were built for reasoning. And reasoning is something that happens in a conversation, not a single exchange. Learning to talk to AI is actually an extension of the same work from the last lesson, rethinking what is possible. Most people don't realize the mode of engagement is itself a ceiling. The moment you stop treating it like a search engine and start treating it like a thinking partner, the whole thing opens up. The difference between someone who gets mediocre results from AI and someone who gets exceptional ones usually isn't the tool that they're using or even what they're asking, it's how they're engaging with it. When you're using AI to build something, solve something, or think through something complex, you're not submitting a request. You're opening a strategic thinking session. That requires a whole different posture. You bring the full picture. You think out loud. You push back on outputs you don't agree with. You explore threads. You go down rabbit holes and come back. You treat the model as a collaborator with serious analytical horsepower, not a sophisticated autocomplete. Now that shift in posture is the unlock. Everything else, better prompt, smarter structure, more precise output, that all follows from that. The model has limited memory of you outside the current conversation, unless you're further along in building context documents, etc., which we're going to get to. Every session pretty much starts cold, and that means if you jump straight to the ask without establishing who you are and what you're actually trying to build, it's going to fill those gaps with assumptions, and those assumptions are going to quietly shape everything that it gives you. The people who get consistently great results from AI are the ones who front load context. Not just here's my question, but here's what I'm building, here's the end goal, here's what matters to me, here's what I want to avoid. That investment at the start of every conversation calibrates every response downstream. You're not just asking a question, you're establishing a working context the model can operate from for the duration of the session. This also changes how the model approaches your problem. When you lead with the destination, it can think backwards intelligently, flag issues before they become problems, and push the strategy further than you would have on your own. When you skip it and go straight to the granular ask, it's solving a small problem in isolation. You'll get an answer, but you won't get the thinking. But the first output is almost never the final output, and treating it like it should be is leaving most of the value behind. The real skill is what you do after the first response comes back. Read it carefully. What's right? What's off? What direction does it need to go and why? You can push on any specific point, redirect the whole approach, go down a side thread to pressure test an idea, and come back to the main line without losing the context, as long as you're working within a reasonable conversation length. This is where strategy actually locks in. A single prompt might only get you 60% of the way there. A genuine back and forth, one where you're reacting, redirecting, building on what's working and correcting what isn't, gets you somewhere you couldn't have mapped from the start. The model is helping you think, not producing text for you to consume, but actively working the problem with you. Now, it's important to say this, you need to be willing to question anything in the output. Point out what you'd change and why. Disagree when something doesn't fit. The more you engage like a collaborator and less like a passive recipient, the sharper the thinking gets on both sides. Now, there's a practical layer worth understanding here. Every conversation has a limit on how much it can hold. That's what's called the context window. For complex builds and strategic problems, the right instinct is almost always to work top down. Establish the big picture and direction first before drilling into single pieces. If you go granular too fast, you spend the conversation on details before aligning on direction. And if the direction needs to change, the work does not carry over. There's also a more subtle thing that happens in very long conversations. Early assumptions can start shaping later outputs in ways that are hard to notice. Sometimes a fresh session with a clean, consolidated starting point produces sharper results than continuing a thread that has gotten too heavy. Knowing when to keep going and when to start fresh is part of the skill. And like everything in this lesson, it's something that you're going to develop by doing it, not by reading about it. The more sessions you run, the more you build intuition for how to structure an engagement, when to push, when to redirect, and when to cut and restart clean. That is it for this lesson. Thank you for watching. In the next lesson, we're covering how to erode your mental boundaries through practice, because thinking about it only gets you so far. All right, see you there.